We will wait 2 minutes before we yell.
No,
You want to go now? Is everybody ready to go now? Yeah. All right. F it. We'll do it live. Okay. Is everyone in the right room? Because you're going to have trouble getting out. So, welcome to Making Web Development Fun Again with Web Components. DrupalCon 2019 starring Brian Olendijk. I'm BTO Pro. I work at Penn State. Sorry, that was pretty anticlimactic. And I drink a lot of coffee. Cool.
I'm Mike Potter. I'm an instructional systems engineer at Penn State. I work with Brian on a lot of different projects, and I'm a web components enthusiast.
And I make his head explode. Okay.
I'm Cassandra Roberts. I work for Red Hat, and I am a front-end architect, engineer, developer, whatever, and also is super in love with web components.
And I'm Kendall Totten. I'm a front-end development manager in the marketing department at Red Hat also. And I think you're noticing the theme here, all in love with web components. This is my 8th DrupalCon, so I'm super pumped to be here.
Woo! So the following preview has been approved for all audiences by the MPAA. That's not actually true, so sorry. All right, so in a world overrun by interfaces. Do I have to click next? Damn it. 2 groups say, nay!
Hey.
I'm not doing that anymore. So, the web is too hard. This is Kendall's last DrupalCon, 8 years, good job. We're not doing web anymore. I'm gonna drink some Netscape tonic and go back home. So, thanks for all the memories. Let's go back to Netflix, everybody, or Netscape, everybody. Thank you for attending, fitting in the door. Remember, to review our session, it's titled Creating a Hello World App in Modern Web Development Techniques. Right, so we're going back to when Netflix again was the web, right? Right, Mike?
No.
That's what we're doing?
No! We went a different way!
Wow, your acting could use some work. Right, so we went web components. We didn't give up because we really wanted to. You might say, wait, what are web components? Thank you, person in the back corner that said that. So, web components are a meta specification. It's just more confusion on top of an already confusing space. But effectively, it lets us build these custom tags that we can repurpose anywhere. They work in all modern browsers. We can use them in local app development now via things like Ionic or Electron. And they can be mixed into any JavaScript library or framework, as long as you don't love React. So, yeah, that was a joke. So what web components are, it's like this. It's a 4-part meta specification. So you get a template tag now, which basically tells the browser anything inside of this, hold on to it. Don't render it immediately until a function is called to tell it to render. It's called stamping. Custom elements, right? So we can do a brand-new-tag, and the spec says it has to have hyphens in it. This is what tells the browser the difference between like a paragraph tag, because all the root elements or primitives are like P, strong, single word, no hyphen, lowercase. And then ES modules, which allows us to get that information into the DOM, so script type module. And then shadow DOM, which gives us this brand new slot tag as something to do some reparenting.
Did you say Shadow Man?
No, I said
Oh.
shadow DOM.
Oh, Shadow DOM. Oh, okay. Well, okay, so Shadow DOM, if you guys don't know what that is, Light DOM is traditional HTML documents. So if you're working with the web, every time you add a paragraph or an H2 tag, you're working with the Light DOM. But within web components, they also have Shadow DOM. So you can hide certain things in there like templates or styles or extra JavaScript where you can bake in functionality. And you can actually name your slots. Slots is what tells your Light DOM pieces where to live inside of that template that's baked into the Shadow DOM.
Oh, sweet. Okay, me again. So if you go to webcomponents.org, you've got kind of this Drupal.org-esque registry of all the components that people are contributing. Most of them are hosted on GitHub and NPM, but it's a good index to find things. But you'll see this big chart here, which is basically saying, hey, there's these 4 parts, and when we got into this 2 years ago, none of those lights were green, really, just all on the left-hand side. And now, thank God, as the web has progressed, everything is turning green. To the point that really only Edge and IE11 need polyfills in order to use this approach. Everything else is just native. So let's make it slightly practical. This is a hideous button example. It says old school button. It should be hideous button. So I have a button. It's a div tag with a background that's yellow. And then I've got a link in there, right? And we've all written this kind of basic HTML for years. And so what that might look like as a web component is I would have a my hyphen button, and then I would have custom properties or attributes on there to say link equals link.com, title equals name, and I would get the equivalent of that previous button, right? So just a very minor amount of abstraction.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Where's my light DOM? If the JavaScript fails, customer gets nothing.
Is there an animation or something that resolves? Yes. Okay. So we'll cover that. We'll cover that down the road. But yes, that is one consideration of this, right? If the JavaScript fails, if you need to support Node.js types of routines, the web components are JavaScript that's going to unpack that to turn it into this. So we'll discuss some different methodologies for handling that. I feel like light DOM's involved in that somehow. So web components allow you to create reusable code and functionality that help you really ensure consistency of your brand, right? So imagine you have like my hyphen website hyphen header, and then you've got 100 properties. Are you really going to express that in a design style guide? Yes, but then people are going to screw it up because it's going to happen 100 times. Versus web components, I make that one tag and I point to it and I use it in 100 places. It is the exact same thing every time. So we start to treat the web like Lego bricks, and web development is fun all over again. Oh, we have progressive enhancement in
There's
here.
my slide.
Interesting.
1 second, man. My button and some light DOM. Look at that. That fails, customer still gets a link.
No. We're going to do both. Okay? I want my JavaScript-based way, and then you can still have that. That's fine. Which you say, well, I'm going to write that twice, but let's say we throw this into a twig template. This is where Drupal comes into the show, right?
Oh,
For like 4
Drupal.
seconds, and then we're getting rid of it again. So in a twig template, it might look something like this, right? And we've been doing this for the last year and a half. We'll be hollowing out those template files and replacing all that selector soup gobbledygook of HTML with web components in this regard. So Mike and I work at Penn State. Why is Penn State using web components? Education is behind the curve, right? Nay, is the phrase, right? So we do a lot of web properties, right? We have to market and brand and build like little noodly project sites for things. So we work on a platform called Elm's Learning Network. So you may have seen this Snowflake before. But basically what it ends up boiling down to is we've got a lot of applications that we build to deliver educational materials to people. When we need to make a lot of things have UI consistency, right? We need to do accessibility testing across, I have like 120 sites, you have like 150 or something, right? So we got a lot of sites, a lot of mini sites, but still need to maintain consistency. So we thought a lot about things like Outlook and G Suite kind of are having to go through this metamorphosis as well. They need to maintain consistency across all these properties. So a website, we might have buttons on it, but we're using web components for that level of consistency so that no matter what UI we make, whether there are buttons there, it's still a fundamental tag that is a button that we can trace back to one location. And so SpongeBob knows we have a hell of a lot of integrations that we're rolling out things for, and we need to have web components all over the place that make our life easy.
All right, so once upon a time, about this time last year, we attended DrupalCon, and we saw a presentation by some cool guys all about web components, and we were like, that sounds rad. We should totally do that. So when we came back to Red Hat, it turned out that there was a handful of people that were also thinking the same thing. And so, Kyle's out there? Oh, there he is. He's on the floor. Yeah, he already drank the Kool-Aid long ago. And so we started up using web components. Use the platform. So Cassandra and I work at Red Hat within the marketing department with a very large team of awesome writers, brilliant strategists, talented designers who are constantly evolving what a product page should look like on Reddit.com and making us crazy. So the components and patterns that our team makes with paragraphs and twig templates can't keep up. So it turns out that we end up dumping markup into the body field, and we welcome the oncoming tech debt. And even if we had enough people, though, to evolve all of those patterns super fast, well, all of the paragraph fields that we're using are only going to make our fragmented database troubles even worse, because we already have a design system. Those of you who may have attended our talk last year, we were telling you all about the cool stuff that we were doing with JSON schemas and turning it into paragraphs. It works really well until you have like 100 of them, and then your database is sad and slow. And beyond that, we really want to be able to share the work that we're doing with other teams at Red Hat. But not everybody's on Drupal 7, not everybody's on Drupal, gasp. And so the wheel reinventing continues even outside of Drupal. And not being able to share makes Red Hatters really sad.
We like to share.
Yes. But there's hope for us and for you. We discovered the power of web components. So these custom HTML tags can be themed to match our brands, and they could be used by Drupal templates and cowboy coders alike. And they could be tweaked as needed to appease any design edge cases, and we're going to talk more about this later. We also realized not all content needs to be reused, so it doesn't always need a separate body field, or a separate database field. So within paragraphs, we were creating dozens of fields for each and every template or little band across the pages on redhat.com. So we had tons of database bloat because of that. And when you use the platform, you can share your web component goodness with all of the teams, with the rest of the world, open source for the win. And so we're super excited about it.
So I want to show you a little bit of our architecture. So at Red Hat, we have a couple of different ways to get content onto the web. And like Penn State, we also have a huge ecosystem of microsites and main sites. Many of our instances are built on Drupal. Yay, Drupal! And they use things like paragraphs, the body fields, templates, all as different ways to get content into Drupal, stored out onto the web. However, we also have hosted content out on their own little platforms, doing their own thing, writing their pretty raw code, getting it on there fast and quick and dirty and unmaintainable. So I just want to show a little visual here. You can see red being our high risk and yellow being our medium risk, but still risky, right? Like maintaining that pattern library, getting that mapped into Drupal, it's not a quick path. And those quick paths are not very maintainable. So what do we do? What's our balance? Well, at Red Hat, we took our multiple Drupal instances, our separate Drupal teams, and we got them to communicate. We got them to work together to break down these barriers, project timelines, priorities, etc., and breaking down all of these walls with web components. Pattern fly elements! T-shirts. Woo! If you ask super cool questions, you can get a T-shirt. We have T-shirts, yeah. So Patternfly Elements is the project that we've started at Red Hat to bring web components to all of our different web properties. We've got a design system collaborative, which directly feeds into the web components, meaning our design system is turned into code directly, instantaneously, pushed out to our websites by just doing a simple update. And then you can see that gets pushed down into Drupal and the hosted assets. So it's CMS neutral.
Did I pivot? Oh, snap. Oh, we pivoted. Did we? Okay, good.
Yes.
Good. This is the way it works. So we take it. So we've been seeing major accessibility wins as a result of switching to web components. We didn't do web components forever. Web components have been around as an idea for like 8 years, and maybe you've heard negative things about them. Don't listen to those people on Twitter, okay? Listen to the fora people up here right now.
We're all on Twitter.
We're all on Twitter too. But we pivoted because of encapsulation. They are relatively SEO friendly, although mentioned, progressive enhancement techniques for solving those types of issues. Like DOM. And so we were able to share the workload across the organization. And by that I mean me and Potter. But you have your whole organization actually. But did mention that Statler and Waldorf are here, and there are a lot of critics of this approach. So let's respond to criticism. Can I even use this? Someone said. Okay, so let's dig into the data on that, because we get that a lot. Can I actually use this approach? Because it was first announced as an idea in 2011. You have to realize specs take a long time to mature. This is a specification of the browser. So I did some traffic analysis on gs.statcounter.com. And so yes, this isn't your website, right? I get that. But I confirmed by going through physical devices and browser stack, the web components would hit 98.26% of all browsing traffic in the world. Again, that's not your traffic. I understand there's edge cases for things, but that's a heck of a lot of people that can natively get web components or get them with a polyfill. And so these numbers are without a progressive enhancement strategy, right? Without just putting things in light DOM and CSS styling it. And so I wasn't able to confirm, but they should work with 99.64% of all traffic. So before you say Edge and IE, right, because that's where all the polyfills are coming in, I get it. Yes, you do need your Edge and IE. There's this wonderful little chart here, it shows that about 15% of all desktop-based traffic is Edge and IE. Again, global numbers. You might have more. But did you know that Edge recently announced that they're hollowing out the Trident engine and replacing it with Chromium? Where is the wild applause? Please tweet at Microsoft and say nice things for once. So yes, you have polyfills in Edge, but that is going to go away by the end of the year. They just released, I think 2 days ago, the beta. So you can start playing around with this now, and people are kind of raving about it that are trapped in a Microsoft ecosystem. So use the platform is going to look more like this. Yes, Chrome, with the Edge icon over there. And so IE11 is not going to be developed, right? And you're sad face because there's still polyfills there. You'll need them forever. But so let's look at something else that's coming up. Did you all know Windows 7 goes end of life in January 2020? That's where a lot of your IE11 traffic is coming from. And again, you're not going to lose all of it, but there's been major shifts. Even when Edge announced, hey, we're going to Chromium underneath, I saw the browser traffic change dramatically because people are like, there's trouble there. I'm just going to Chrome for this next project. So Microsoft always they stick to their promises, right? You all know that. Love their service contracts. They definitely won't kill off IE11 early, or will they? They killed off IE10 early, and they've kind of been signaling, hey, stop using IE11, everybody, which they had to then respond to this blog post on their developer forums and say, like, no, we're actually supporting it. Sorry, that was a legal contractual thing. But so this is the progressive enhancement strategy that I'm using in Hack CMS, which is a web component-based CMS we're working on. So I'm going to start treating IE11 like it doesn't have JavaScript. I don't care anymore. I'm still going to send you stuff, right? But that means I'm, from a progressive enhancement standpoint, going to treat Node.js browsers in a way that I have to send them content, and I'm going to start treating IE the same way. Edge is currently going to get a polyfill. That's about 2.5% of global traffic, and then it's going to turn into an evergreen browser by the end of the year. And so there are some edge cases, certain versions of Firefox, Safari, where you still have to use polyfills. And so what that ends up looking like on like my own blog site that uses this is no JavaScript, but it still gives you something, right? I haven't themed it because I'm lazy. And then if you're on Edge, until Chromium kicks in, I send you this watered down, but yet it is still web components driven user experience until you get to our the actual blog you could go and see, and that's what everybody else sees, right? So it's a large portion of traffic. I don't know why we had a video there. I don't even want a video. So questions to ask yourself associated with this, like, can I actually use this? Does our product or site launch after January 2020? Could we maybe put in place a progressive enhancement technique that handles this for us, right? You don't just throw away those users, for sure. But we're starting to talk about 95% of your users have this capability native. You can ship them a dramatically improved experience over that other 5%. And can we really afford the additional expense of supporting IE when it hits that 5% threshold? So please just tell your client no. And when was the last time we reviewed our policies on browser support, to be perfectly honest, right? The web is shifting pretty dramatically, finally, towards some of these standards. So yeah, but who's using this? No one, right? I mean, you've never heard of YouTube. No one's gone to YouTube before, but you might not care about YouTube because that's just some Google property, right? Only Google uses this. And I know we all don't like Comcast, unless there's someone here from that company, in which case I really like your interface decisions. But if you go to Comcast website and you right-click, you can see web components, right? This is another neat thing about web components. You just right-click and see these tag or name-name, and you know it's a web component. But you've never played any video games either, not from corporate shill EA, right? Well, all of their web properties deliver as web components. Why? Because they also have tons of microsites that they need a layer of design conformity on, right? BYU, education's really far behind. I know some education people in the room, right? We adopt everything last, except for this. We're all ahead of you. This is 3 years old. BYU has been delivering these. This is where I stumbled on this, because I also was saying no one uses this. This is phantom. They've been doing this for 3 years. So this is their top level domain. You can go and see the BYU-header tag and the BYU-logo tag. I was told by the people that architected this, they've got about 90% of the university using these tags. So where you really start to get this power is you throw these out on a CDN, you reference the CDN. Someone in marketing, they never change their mind, right? That blue changes a shade for some reason. They push it out to one location, and 90% of several thousand websites get updated instantaneously. So, and if you use Google Chrome, you can go into the settings pages and right-click, and they use web components to build the browser. So it's kind of weird, but I mean, that's where everything's going. So you might say, well, the specification is too primitive. I don't even understand what's going on here. And I'd say, yes, that's right. That was the joke. So, so let's look at what that actually practically looks like, right? So if we're doing things in vanilla JS, right, without additional libraries, there's some libraries we'll mention that help you build components faster. Shadow DOM looks like this. We have this.shadowroot.append child. And that's basically saying, hey, give me a shadow root, and then take whatever has been placed in here and throw it there, right? So this is a template that's kind of abstracted away from everything else to style. You get style encapsulation as a result of this. So then if I have a tag that has some templates, some HTML, right? This is the innards of a web component here. I have to do attribution observation in this. So this is a JSON little editor tag. And so I have observed attributes you can see up there in the top. And so that's basically saying these are the custom properties that are in this element, right? This is why people say this isn't, ready. I can't just use this by itself. There is a lot going on here. I have to write a lot of code just to get like custom properties. I have to write these very primitive types of parts of the spec. Vanilla JavaScript web components have lifecycle hooks too. So you have a constructor as far as when this thing emerges, right? And we're defining it. Then you have connected, which means it's been attached to the DOM, right? And I can query it and do things to it. And then you have disconnected, meaning it's been ripped out of the DOM. Do I have another lifecycle over there? No, I don't. So you can see in the connected callback there, or on the side, I've attached an event listener in that case. And then disconnected, well, I want to pull that event listener back off as a very basic example here. So this would be why people legitimately say, like, it's a very primitive spec, right? It's just like, hey, the thing was attached and it's removed and the styles in are encapsulated. Oh, you consarn it. Pointed all the arrows there. So what you're saying is adopt Polymer, which is a legitimate criticism over the years. Polymer is a element library developed by Google to help you build web components faster. And so forever, a lot of React people just said, well, there's Polymer, so you're saying, oh, use a Google product instead of a Facebook product. Well, no. There's a really diverse web components community. So these are just some different, and our notes are out there. The slides we tweeted them out already. These actually link to the different projects. But these are just a couple of the different element libraries that you can use to build elements on top of if you don't want to just write directly to the spec. So there's Polymer 3, Patternfly, maybe you've heard of it up here. Lit Element, Slim.js, Skate.js, Felty, Stencil. These are all achieving the same truth, that these libraries, no matter how they're constructed, in the end, they're just calling the same vanilla JavaScript to attach to the DOM. And so these have full data compatibility. You can mix these elements into the DOM, no matter what the library is. And really, if we're looking at what the differences are in these, so this is a template tag that's using Polymer. So Polymer will give you data binding where you put brackets around the property name, and then it basically prints that into the template. Lit Element has the same thing. If you've seen, was that ES6 template literals? So it is, yeah. So if you use template literal syntax, it's saying this.name, right? Because you're within the scope of that element. That's not dramatically different. It's just a different syntax. And in the case of lit element, that's the same as what the vanilla JS way is. Lit element is just making sure that whenever that property updates, it actually updates visually in the DOM for you. Kind of what you would expect to happen. So we aren't really all that different, right? This is Patternfly, right? So then each one of these, you'd see like class, whatever it is, extends. And then in the first, it was, HTML element is a vanilla in the DOM. If it's Polymer element, it's Polymer element. If it's Patternfly, which Patternfly is then an abstraction extending HTML element. So then why not React, Angular, or Vue? Either you want to?
I'm good.
I'm
You're good?
not going to take that one.
You're not going to take that one? Are you sure? Because you have the next slide on here.
Actually, yeah. So I stumbled on that little gem. Actually, this is hilarious. So this is a screenshot of somebody's their own website with their Angular, their React core developer, but their own website was built using Angular. So no judgment because the cobbler's children have no shoes. I took down my own website years ago because I didn't have time to maintain it. So I'm not judging this person personally, but I thought it was hilarious. That's all.
You're sure you had the SEO here too, right? So all of these libraries you can use your custom elements in these libraries. That's why not those, right? You're not really going to take you're not really going to take Angular and mix it into a React app. But you might make one little thing on the web page and repurpose it over and over and over again, like a CTA card, for example, that you're going to use across libraries. What is this? Client-side render JavaScript. You made this for SEO. I'm gonna make this slide.
We were talking about, so back to our original argument about light DOM versus data binding, we were saying, well, hey, Patternfly elements, our whole goal is that we want the page to gracefully degrade. So if JavaScript doesn't load, if you're in an old browser, if you're a search engine, we want the content to be present no matter what. So this slide is just illustrating the fact that all of these fancy, newfangled JavaScript frameworks are kind of turning a blind eye to this. These search engines are crawling those pages, and they're not getting the content. That's bad news.
So, I'm sorry, so you're saying that actually Bing and Yahoo don't render websites that are built in JavaScript in React if they don't have
Some of them do better than others, but they have some issues, yeah. If you're, I mean, it depends on how you're passing in the data to some degree, but if a lot of your stuff is being passed in at build time, then yeah, the page is empty if you're not executing JavaScript.
That's why server-side rendering is really big in those communities.
So why can we all just get along, please? There's like so many libraries and frameworks, and we didn't get into JavaScript really at all beyond like jQuery for years because I was sick of all these arguments of which way to go for any of this stuff. So why not do both, right? So if we want to think of an analogy here, if Angular, React, and Vue also comes up now a lot, if they're kind of this grid plate where we're using this as the foundation to build an application or a website, think of web components as individual Lego bricks that you're putting on that grid plate. They snap together in a very standards conformant way, and you can also then mix them into your application. So this isn't really saying throw those things out, although if you see a lot of angsty people on Twitter, they'll recently say throw all those things out, we're burning this all down. I'm one of those angsty people. But if you go to custom-elements-everywhere.com, it has some conformance testing across libraries as far as how those libraries perform against the web component specification. And if you scroll through there, as that little GIF just did for a little bit, oh, there we go. What's this for? You can see things like, oh, Angular has really high compatibility with web components. It has, I think, like 12 or 13 different libraries, and it shows via automated testing what the conformance is. And it's largely really high across everything. So that was a really long introduction. That was like the credit sequence. That was the trailers. Like, thank you. You all sat through the trailers. Now we're going to get to the actual movie. I hope you didn't miss out on the popcorn. So introducing web components, the trilogy. Oh, no, it's trilogy again.
So much trilogy.
Bubbles up. Oh, yes. And first, every good trilogy starts out with the prequel, right? And the prequel is the fun part because it's all the character development and the build tools and the component libraries. And what else, Mike?
So what does every great superhero need? The villain.
Yes.
T-shirt.
T-shirt, yeah. So, what makes a great villain? Villain that's maybe complicated. So, like, we don't know exactly how we feel about this villain, right? So, every great villain is introducing chaos into this world that our superhero has to battle, right? And we're like, oh, darn you, villain. But once we get to know the villain and why they're doing it, we're a little conflicted, right? Because they're introducing chaos, but ultimately they're doing it for a purpose. They're doing it to level out the playing field or challenge the status quo or just trying to change the way the game is played, right? So they're doing these bad things for the right reasons, right? Let's keep this in mind whenever we go to our next slide, okay? Because we're going to cover the barriers to adoption for web components. And there are a few. So the first one is libraries. Like Brian covered, there's a ton of different ways to write web components. You might be questioning, like, how do I even start doing that? In what instance would I use a Polymer library or lit? You need to know some JavaScript knowledge, ES6, how to extend classes, DOM events, life cycles, light DOM versus shadow DOM, and then everybody's favorite, the tooling tree. Woo! Who is excited about the tooling in front-end development right now. You are sick. All right? So, yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there, okay? So there's, how do I compile stuff? What's the difference between Yarn and NPM? Is there a difference? Monorepos. Hey, that's a thing, okay? And then integration knowledge with web components specifically. How do I bundle my web components together in the correct versions to deliver them to the correct browsers? Where do I go for documentation? Just like a single website where I can go that answers all my questions. Doesn't exist yet, okay? So it's gonna leave you feeling a little frustrated at first, okay? But hang in there, okay? Because these are all problems that we face in front-end development in general, right? Why do I need all this stuff? Keep in mind, this is just a means to an end, okay? Right now, our villain is a little complicated, so we need to help our hero in this story. And okay, that was a downer, okay? We're gonna pick it back up, because we promise you fun, and we're gonna deliver it to you. So this is like, yay, the hero learns that they have superpowers, woohoo! Or like, hey, my new sidekick, cool. This is the sidekick to web components, all right? Or at least one of them. It's inspired by the work that Red Hat did that was just trying to reduce the barrier to entry for creating web components and give people the ability to quickly develop web components. So we took inspiration from that, and we built a CLI to help you build and distribute web components. But our goal is not to hook you on a tool chain, okay? It's just a means to an end, okay? We're just trying to get you over those initial barriers. So we needed tooling. We have lots of components that we have built over the past year, and there's not a lot of us. It's just two, three, or four of us that have been working on this for the past year. So we needed tooling to help us out. So if you want to receive all of the frustration and knowledge that we've worked through over the past year, you can run this command, and it'll give you WC Factory. So with WC Factory, you can create web components, but not only that, you can create web component libraries, and then you can distribute those easily using WC Factory. So our mental model is you run WCF start, and you start a company. That could be you, it could be the organization that you work for. Then you would create a web component library with WCF Factory. So that starts a factory. You can name your factory and then start adding elements to that factory with WCF elements. So it's bundling up all the automation that we feel is necessary to correctly deliver web components at scale. So basically, WCF start, answer some questions. WCF factory, answer some questions about your organization. And then WCF element. And this is where you're creating your first element in your first web component library. And it wants to know initially, what is the base element? Is it vanilla? Is it Polymer? Is it lit HTML? What's the name of your element? Description. And then it's going to ask you, do you want to define an API for your element? Okay, this is the amazing part about web components is we can define excuse me, a predictable API. So in this case, we want our logo to have the connotation of theme, tell it's of type string. And then after we're done answering questions, WCF is going to build that element for us correctly. So it's going to scaffold everything out, install everything over good Wi-Fi. If we open it up, we can take a look at the files that it created. So you can see that we have a factories directory. We have our first web component library, which is Gotham main. So this is like Gotham University. And we created an element, Gotham logo. Now, we break up the element into JavaScript, CSS or Sass file, and HTML. We just think that the development experience is nice that way.
It's awesome. And I just want to highlight this 1 second. This means that if you have people with discrete skill sets, meaning you have a CSS developer who will not touch JavaScript if their life depended on it, you can throw them at this repo and say, go theme my components. You don't have to touch the JavaScript. I have this JavaScript expert over here who's going to go to town on the component. You just tell me what you want the semantics to look like, and you write the styles, and the rest of it will come together. And so you can separate out your concerns, which is freaking awesome for a large organization.
Yeah, it definitely is. It just makes the development experience a little bit nicer too. So the next step after you created hundreds of these web components is it's still difficult to manage. So we're working on something called WCF UI, which is a UI for your CLI, which is kind of dumb, but it's necessary. So this is, you can see all of your factories. You can go in a factory. You can select which elements you'd like to work on, and then you can start running your scripts necessary to bundle those and set up documentation and demos and things like that. So that's not in WCF yet. Hopefully by the end of DrupalCon, we'll get that in there for you. Yeah. Okay, so let's take a look at an example of how we use this tool in the real world. So let's say that we're working for Gotham University. We're a developer. Our university has 2 web component libraries, one that the central marketing team manages, one that the Gotham science team manages. And we, as a developer, are working on an application that uses web components from both of those. Okay, so this is a very common scenario that once you've made a lot of web components that you'll find yourself in. Is that I have components in lots of different applications. So if we take a look at how those are managed, those are 3 separate repos. We have our 2 factories that are mono repos. So each of these mono repos have lots of different elements in them. And then we ultimately want to incorporate those elements in our application. And we can have tons of these applications. So how do we get them into our applications? We publish them through NPM. And we have one organization called Gotham that all of our components are published under. So that means even though they are worked on in different repos, they're ultimately published in one unified way. So let's say that we're working on this, and all of a sudden, there's a breaking change. Marketing's like, oh no, we ran into an issue with this logo. Apparently someone else was using it. We need to change it on the fly. That means changing how many of your web properties, like really fast. Can you do it? How fast could you do that? Okay, so with web components, this would be easy, relatively. So this application uses 3 web components. It uses the Gotham logo component, uses the Gotham footer component, and it uses the Gotham science header component. Okay? So let's see how we might make a change to that. So the first thing we need to do is we need to open up WC Factory. We need to go to where this logo resides in Gotham main. We're going to open that up, and then we're going to start working on it. So I'm going to run the start script, which is just watching for any changes in my element. And then once it notices it, it's going to bundle it for ES6, UMD, etc. We're going to open it up in our editor. It's an SVG, so we're going to make a change to that SVG. We're going to save it, and we're going to take a look at how it looks like in the demo. Looks great. So we can see that we haven't introduced any majorly breaking changes to our variations, to our APIs. Then we're going to use Lerna, a tool called Lerna that helps us publish monorepo packages up to NPM. And we're going to publish that logo change. Now I know that that logo is also used in the science header. So I'm going to take a look at how that looks in the science header. Now I can see that the margin is a little bit different. So I'm gonna tweak it a little bit. I'm gonna add some margin. Margin right. 0.5 em. Perfect. Looks great. So this is the demo that's going to be published online that everybody can review. I'm going to make a change, commit it, publish it with Lerna so that it goes up to NPM, and now those changes are now available to all of our applications. So if I go into my application, I'm going to update those dependencies. Refresh, and it's updated. So I didn't have to change anything about that logo in my application. That was changed centrally, and it was pushed out, and I just received that change. So I didn't have to go into every single one of my web properties and update that freaking logo.
It's almost too easy.
It's too easy. Why didn't they think of this before? So that was the prequel. You guys ready for even more fun?
Get hype.
Woohoo!
All right.
Next. All right. So we're going to look at some web components that we've actually made, not just ones for Gotham University, because we don't work there yet. That was the joke, because we're from Penn State. Thank you. One university person for laughing. So let's look at a tag that we've made and dig into what that actually ends up looking like practically, right? So I needed to validate JSON. And previously, I would have gone and gotten a jQuery library and then been pissed that it didn't plug into our Angular front end. And then I've got this React date picker over here. But like all this conversation didn't just happen. So what we did is we said, all right, I'm going to make a JSON editor. And so what a JSON editor looks like is it's just this basic text area that takes a blob of JSON and validates. And it's red if it's not valid, and it's blue and happy if it is. So what that looks like as far as getting that into a web page, even for that little example here. Because the way that you integrate these into the page and tell your browser about them is pretty uniform. So you can see I have that first line with the arrow is that web components bundle. So it's a polyfill. That helps you get those older browsers up with the program, Edge, IE11, some older versions of Firefox and Safari. Then I pull in Web Animations Next Lite, which is a Web Animations API. I end up leveraging it a lot. It hasn't stabilized fully yet in W3C, but you don't need that necessarily. Then I have script type module. And so this is a new way in which the browser can interpret scripts, which basically says, spider through and find all the dependency tree and then process the whole thing, right? So it's modular JavaScript as opposed to just loading a whole bunch of different files. So I import the JSON outline schema and JSON editor in this case. And then I'm going to put them into the page. So what that looks like in the DOM is I've got a JSON-editor tag, label equals JSON, and value, and I just pasted in some JSON here, right? Then as we dig into that, how we make it blue or whatever, right? So we can do scoped CSS in this case. So if there's an error detected in the application, right, in that element saying, hey, this is not valid JSON, then it's going to set an attribute of error. So then I can target it with this host selector and say, well, if the tag has an error present, then I want you to apply this CSS. So, I cheated, obviously. There was something else there. I'm using a paper input tag here, or it says paper text area. Like, where did that come from? That's not normal. I didn't write that. So I would go to webcomponents.org. All the @polymer / paper whatever or app whatever elements are by Google. They're really accessible. They're really nice. I highly recommend getting started just playing with those, even if you end up replacing them. And so I ended up putting that in by just reading what the documentation is on that. Now, this is where we get into all the libraries are a little bit different, right? But they're pretty much doing the same thing, except for one tiny instance with Polymer. So that paper text area, if I want to use that tag, I've read the documentation, I import the paper tag reference, and now I can use that tag in my tag. Polymer has this connotation with the curly braces there on value of two-way data binding. Among all the libraries, it's the only one that does support two-way data binding. Two-way data binding is an anti-pattern, though. You really shouldn't do two-way data binding. You should generally do the normal braces, which is one-way data binding. So the idea of data flow is that you send your properties down, and then if you need to understand the change that occurred, that you listen for events that are coming from down below you in a child element. So then I've got some properties on there, got the label on it, and then I published JSON editor, which is now available on webcomponents.org. Yes, there's obviously a lot more JavaScript in there, but that's the basic flow, right? I had a problem, I solve it with a single tag, I maybe leverage other tags, I apply some CSS styles, everything is scoped and contained within that element. But now I've got a new Lego brick that's out on Web Components, webcomponents.org that you can use. And so then when I go to make the hack schema editor, which is another discrete use case that we ended up coming up with, I can now stand on the shoulders of that JSON editor tag. And so then I take the JSON editor, and now I have a JSON editor in this other tag. This is a tag that's a composite of other web components. Because much like normal HTML, you can build and then stack these things in one another. And so there's the little JSON editor tag in that use case. And just to point out, there's code editor. Does anyone know what a code editor is? No? Okay, we were at the wrong conference game. So a code editor, right there. Does that look like anything that you've used? Maybe a lot of you. Sublime. It does look like Sublime. Microsoft ripped them off. But what did Microsoft rip off? It's the VS Code editor. So we built a code editor tag because we need to edit code in our web components. So you can go and get the code editor tag, but if you look at the dependencies for it, it uses Monaco. So if you're using VS Code, that's actually written in HTML, JavaScript, CSS, all these fun things. You can actually leverage the Monaco editor itself in the browser. And then if you want to put that in one of your pages, you get our code editor tag. And now you've got a VS Code instance that does code autocompletes, that does highlighting, has all the accessibility improvements. It's kind of crazy. So that's just one tag in our universe. I'll turn it over to the other crazy tags.
All right, so as you heard about in the trailer, you heard a little bit about Patternfly, right? It was a pre-existing design system at Red Hat, and it was actually for applications originally. And in the last version, the team at Red Hat tried to support all of the cool JavaScript frameworks that were popular at the time. So jQuery, Angular, AngularNG, of course our favorite React. But as you might imagine, those are pretty difficult to support, right? So in the next iteration, the Patternfly team said, that's it, we're simplifying, we're using React only. But don't worry, we won them over with our wit, charm, extensibility, scalability, accessibility, and now web components are part of the crew. All right, just so irresistible. So let's see some components. So here we have an easy example to start with. This is a PFE, Patternfly Elements, card component. It has 3 sections or slots, which have built-in layout styles. And what that means is if I put a call to action component, another one, in like the footer slot of this card, the flexbox styles that are built into that card will align that button to the bottom. Maybe. Is it going to click? There it is. Hey. Okay. Now, if I want to change the color of my card, I'll just pass in a different theme value, like complement or accent or something cool like that. So you can see there's the color attribute, and so I can just flip the colors of the cards very easily. It's all baked in. Now here's another pretty simple example. This is our accordion component. And you could put whatever you want inside the panel. That's just light DOM. We talked about that earlier. And this component has all the basic functionality that you'd expect from an accordion, which means if you click on the header, it expands to show the content inside the panel, right? But what if you're not using a mouse? What if you're using a keyboard or a screen reader? Well, we've got you covered. So this is the really simple markup that the person building the page or template, even a Drupal template, would use. But when it upgrades, when the JavaScript renders, instant accessibility. All the ARIA labels, the roles, the unique IDs, the classes that we're leaning on, they're all added for you by JavaScript in that web component. Too easy. Now, if you allow me to go on a tangent for just a minute here, this next example is about making components work within a system. See, we've realized through the years that building components and patterns, that naming is hard. It might be one of the hardest parts about our job. So if you name a certain style with descriptive words like red button or skinny tabs or something, it kind of boxes you in, right? It's really hard to evolve what that thing looks like after the fact because you can't change the color of a button that's called red button. It's annoying. So we came up with a naming convention that's really easy to remember and spell and has no design meaning at all. And it's very distinctly elemental, so Patternfly elements. So here we have our variant earth, and then we've got another one called wind, and we can make up a third called fire. I know, it's nerdy, it's weird, it doesn't make any sense. But it allows us a lot of freedom and flexibility. So you can see, like, these variations of our tab sets are pretty similar, right, today. but we might change what that means tomorrow. We've got a lot of flexibility here because we want to be careful about what kinds of things we're exposing, because this might get used in the body field somewhere or in somebody's single page application. So we don't want to bake in too much meaning into those things. So we're just kind of keeping the design system under the covers so we can evolve what that means. Okay, so a couple more examples here. This is our vertical tab set, and you can see that even though I've added this new variant called vertical, I can still change what the color or the flare looks like with that other variant called earth or wind. Now this is important, I'm highlighting this because what I'm trying to say is we're not baking everything into that one component single-handedly, because some things are important. Some things are related to the content itself. If you've got a lot of content, maybe your headers are really long, and so like the horizontal tabs, it doesn't work for you, and you need a vertical one, that's important. So I want to make sure we're separating out things that are distinctly fundamental and relate to the content. So these ones are just about design flair. Okay, I'm really about to blow your mind here. Spaceship! It's Cassandra's favorite. Okay, so we realized as we were building these out, the slots for the accordions and the tab sets were very similar. Header, panel, header, panel, header, panel. Okay, you get the idea. So why couldn't we combine these into one content-focused pattern? So behold, the content set component. Looks familiar, header, panel, header, panel. So you just plug in your content. You don't worry about what it looks like, because you shouldn't, because it's design flair at the end of the day, the way that you're rendering it. So this is even better, because we could just drop this into the body field and have even less concern about what it looks like. Talk about separating your content from your presentation layer. So when this component upgrades, it'll transform magically into either an accordion or a tab set. But which one, you might ask? Well, when we were working through the usability challenges of trying to display a horizontal tab set, we kind of ran into, well, what happens on mobile? There's some creative solutions out there about kind of little sideways scrolls or whatever, but we're like, well, what if we just didn't? What if we didn't display it? What if we upgraded to a pattern that was better suited for mobile functionality? So we're looking at the same component, that content set component here side by side, and one is smaller than the other. And you can see that the one that has enough space, larger than 768, to upgrade to a horizontal tab set does. The other one just stays as an accordion. Kind of neat. So you can find all these examples at the Patternfly Elements project on GitHub. And I know, this is pretty exciting, right? But hang on to your seats. I've got one more bit that might put you over the edge. It's time for a quick intermission to talk about design systems. We love it. So components, they're usually talked about in a general sense they're related to design systems, right? They're just little pieces of that building block system. So we want to focus on a really important word there, which is design. One of the biggest reasons that we think our design system is going to enjoy wild success is because we have some dedicated designers that are focused on important fundamental pieces like typography, harmonious colors, spacing, all across our components library. So that's really important. And our designers have been good to us, so we want to be good to them right back. We want to make sure that we have a partnership. So when we're putting components into places in the wilds, we're putting them into Drupal templates or individual pages or applications, we start to understand what the different use cases are, or even how users are interacting with those components. And we need to keep that as a fluid conversation and be able to evolve them. And because the styles are all baked into the custom tags, it's easy to do. We still have control over those designs. And you may have heard that web components are black boxes of encapsulation. Or are they? Oh.
Twist.
Well, we're here to tell you. You can expose hooks. Drupalers like hooks. You can expose hooks to your developers who are going to utilize these and your designers so that they can change nuanced properties in case they need to solve for design situations that you can't possibly foresee when you're creating these components. Unless you've got a crystal ball that I don't know about, I don't have one. So these hooks are called
Custom properties! AKA CSS variables, AKA cascading variables, AKA, I don't know, lots of names for them. But they're the key to your success when you're talking about theming and web components. If you're, sorry, did you want to?
Oh, sure. I'll jump back in.
Okay.
So if you want to use these CSS variables to theme your components or to theme your web page, it doesn't even have to be related to web components. You could use these today in plain old CSS. You can redefine the value of those variables. So you can see here on this card that all I'm doing is I'm conjuring up that custom property and I'm passing in a new value like light blue so that I can change the color of just this one card on my web page. And you might be horrified to think about like putting in really custom stuff into like inline style tags, kind of icky. But we're talking about the exceptions here, right? This is not to be used lightly, and so you want to make sure that you're people that are building these or maybe overriding these properties understand the consequences because it could create technical debt. But you also don't want to have this black box where they're forced to go off the range because they're going to do what they need to do anyways, right? People are going to pave the cow path. So we want to make sure that they can solve for what they need to do. And for more insights into this topic, you definitely want to check out Cassandra's session tomorrow at 2:30. There's a preview for another one. Yeah.
Man, you mean there's another talk I had to go to just to hear all of this one? I thought this was a trilogy, not a 4-part movie. Greedy studio.
So much goodness. Couldn't
All right, so we're into the sequel. This is the home stretch here. So we're going to use the dirty word of the evening, Drupal. It's only come up about 4 times at DrupalCon. Here, ooh, Drupal, a sequel. So if we're talking about Drupal and web components, there is a web components module that you can get if you want to. Still use Drupal 6. I got you so bad. You were like, I'm taking a picture of that. It's for D8. No, don't really need it for D8 because the tooling can script and automate some of that. So last year, that was the joke as well, that I built all this amazing design system stuff for Drupal 6, because I did, and everything else, because you're building it for the web, right? So I can build things for Drupal 6, 7, 8, 9, doesn't matter anymore, okay? It could be in Twig, it could be in WordPress. No matter what it is, we're building against it. So I had this wonderfully hideous screenshot from last year. It was in Drupal 6, obviously the strongest platform on the internet last year. And I had this like drop-down menu of things, except it looks better this year, and it's going to keep looking better because we can attack these problems at scale. So this is our editor of the future hacks, which is to go up against Gutenberg and prevent this conference from collapsing. Because have you all seen Gutenberg? They're trying to take you out. This is war. This is where we're building up to the end of the sequence here. So hacks is your one Drupal.org module with 8, 7, and 6 releases in there. I can make a 5 if someone really needs that. British Columbia, I think, still uses that a little bit. Right, but the point is it's decoupled. When we get this decoupled with these assets, we have this workflow in place, these problems get a lot easier. And so the web components to Drupal workflow is basically that we create elements in WC Factory in our case, although you could create them in anything really. Then we publish them to NPM or GitHub, right? So we have them in version control, publishing to NPM. We have tagged releases, so we have a point in time to point to. Polyfills get us those older browsers on board, right? So we have to have a polyfill in place for those. Build help is part of that as well. So we have a build routine in which you're trying to compile to hit ES5 and ES6 targets. If that doesn't mean anything to you, don't worry, it doesn't mean anything to me either. But it's basically IE11, Edge, older versions of Firefox, older versions of Safari. There are things that don't support ES6 JavaScript syntax, and so you have to compile in order to write pretty wonderful things and still have them work there. Then we have to integrate that into Drupal. So either integrate it into a theme or via module. If you get the hacks module, it does actually integrate it via the module for you if you want it to. Or you just throw the references into like html.html.twig. I don't know why the word HTML is there twice. So that's the joke. It's actually the way you do it. So and then we implement, right? So we've taught Drupal via that Twig template integration. Imagine the front end is now going to know what those definitions are. And so now we can actually implement those tags, start using them the way we would divs, p tags, everything else. So what that looks like in an integration slide here, right, is so I've got a way of detecting which version to send you. So a weird thing just about the way everything has evolved in JavaScript land with these browsers is if you can do a detect for whether or not import, in this case, a dynamic import, if the browser that you're currently serving the page to can't support that methodology, you know it can't support web components without polyfills. Oddly, just because of the way things shook out, if the browser supports that, then you can skip all of this and go right to the end, and it's just script type module. And so to 90% of browsing traffic, I don't serve polyfills, just using this type of detection methodology. This, in my mind, gets rid of a lot of the questions surrounding like server-side rendering. We did look into server-side rendering at one time, and it's just really complicated. It's not that you can't do it, but it wasn't for me. So in here, you see the main bulk of this is all in trying to hit those polyfilled older browsers. So see, I have this blue arrow which is effectively a line that's saying, hey, here's the polyfills, and then a build, right? You can see in the name of the build, it says build/ES5 AMD. So I've done a build leading up to it. And then there's this stupid check you also have to do for Firefox, older versions of it. So then in my theme template, what I would do is I'd use my button, right? So if I've done my build routine, I've made my button or the Gotham button logo, then I can throw this in a twig template, implement it, right? Because I know when it ships out the door that Drupal's going to go, hey, I put this my button here, but I've already got the definitions, and then the user's browser is going to unpack those. So then also if I want to put that in like a template, right, I'm just doing a twig variable bind into that. That's an actual silly example that we've had. So then if I'm going way back in time to Drupal 7, which still a lot of people use at the front of this room.
Don't judge me.
Don't judge me. Then it might look something like that, right? I'm doing this in a PHP template variable. I'm printing into it. So then what this looks like in a production example that we have is, right, I've got an interface over there, and you see the arrows are pointing to different buttons and things. But then in the page.tpl.php, in my case, you see I've mixed in some different web components, right, with dedicated functionality. So what a build routine ends up looking like with WC Factory to get it to work in Drupal, I type WCF build. After I've built my elements, I pick the monorepo I'm using, and I say, hey, build me a Drupal 8 twig template. I'm going to call it D8 theme, and I'm going to say, I don't know, it's a Drupal boilerplate because I'm doing it for a demo video for you. So it's going to run for a while. This has been consolidated to 2 minutes, but it takes like 30. And it's going to generate a boilerplate D8 theme and build and compile all of your web components for you to use in said theme. So there is my twig template that's got the correct references for doing the polyfill routine, as well as hitting all those wonderful, beautiful evergreen browsers that are out there. And so then if we look at what this is templated, it's basically pointing to the polyfills, writing a package.json dynamically, and then doing a yarn install of those things that I published to NPM. This is looking at the build routine file. So it is a little confusing, but Polymer has the front end thing that you may have seen or looked at the library, but also has tooling underneath, which is a CLI. So we leverage the tooling because it works in all web component libraries. So then if you look at what a build looks like, it's hideous, right? There's the point of opening that file. But if you look at the nice ES6 one, it's just importing and referencing all of those other tags. So if you don't want to use all your tags, you can pick these things back apart, run commands. Like Mike said, we don't want to wedge you to our way of doing tooling, so then you're forced to update with how we're doing it. We're kind of just trying to set in motion all these different approaches. So then I'm going to put my web components, that build directory, in my site's all web components. I'm going to turn on my wonderful boilerplate theme. And then someone's going to walk in front. And then I've got a paper button. I've got a Wikipedia query card. And of course got a meme, because I got to have a meme with some Legos. So that leads us to, how do we use web components?
It's almost
Kendall?
like you could use them anywhere, right? It's
We
like you
could
put
place
them
them all over the
like a
place.
traditional Drupal template, or like a paragraph template, or just dump them in the body field.
Just get them in there.
It's a good time.
So, yeah. So you might be wondering, like, I could just scatter those throughout the body field, right? That's what you're saying? Like,
I mean,
I could do it
feeling
though.
dangerous.
Yeah. Well, that's actually interesting that you said that, because that was sort of Jeff Eaton's idea in 2014, whenever he released, one of the most important articles in Drupal history. So, battle for the body field. So what Jeff was outlining was, in battle for the body field, we introduced paragraphs into Drupal, and he warned that maybe we would rush to what he called chunk all the things. This was,
Chunked.
yeah, I chunk too. Everybody does, right? It's because you're trying to solve a presentational problem the Drupal way, right? So you're moving any piece of visually structured content out of the body field and into database tables, because what you're doing is you're severing that content, and you're ultimately increasing complexity in your Drupal site, and you're decreasing portability of that content to solve a presentational problem, okay? And I agree, it is a problem. So what he explored in this article was how XML attempted to solve a similar problem. So he outlined that, with XML, you could wrap schema information around your content that traveled with this content. So you would add meaning without removing the content from its context. Okay, so this was in 2014, and he points to web components specifically as the possible solution. Now, he said it's still early stages. There's this thing called Polymer. We'll see where that goes. But if this plays out and if it standardizes, this could be the solution to this problem. It's 2019. It's standardized.
It is the solution.
It's the solution.
So, if I may interrupt for a moment.
Oh, yeah.
I felt really inspired by this.
Okay.
So I actually
right.
thought I would write a haiku, if you don't mind if I share it. Okay. Thou shalt store meaning and context, not appearance, in the body field. Thank you.
That was beautiful.
Thank you.
That was beautiful. It's over. It's not a strong bad email. So let's take a look at upcoming attractions because our 3-part film is come to a close. So what does the future hold for us? So this is an interesting little repo stumbled on. These are web components that they've done in 4 different design libraries, but yet I believe the tag is the same name. So these are thrown into Storybook, which our tooling also, don't have time to get into, but our tooling also sets in place things so that you can have a storybook automatically generated of your elements for your designers to play with. So this is just showing using knobs to modify the tags and basically treat those tags like an API. So Penn State is doing this. If you go to webcomponents.psu.edu/style guide and you're not going to critique the fact that it's only halfway done, you can start to get a glimpse into the elements that we're doing and see them all in one place. I'll say the most impressive one that Nikki has made in the last year is our simple -colors element. And this more or less routinizes all color contrast accessibility issues that could possibly come up. So we have a dedicated tag just to the management of color and design. We mix that tag into the rest of our tag library, and so we always have something that's in charge of colors within that. This is getting a little more crazy, but you can search for KV storage. I saw this on coming from Google. It's talking about import maps. Has anyone heard of import maps? Good, me neither. So import maps, right? If we have a script type module, and then we were doing those imports before, wouldn't it be awesome if the browser just shipped some of that functionality automatically? And so I think Google's going to get a little absurd and force us all to use Angular or something. But with an import map, you could say, in this case, KV storage is a Google-specific solution for local storage. Local storage in JavaScript is pretty slow. It was never really engineered for the way some people are using it. So they made this KV storage thing. But what this is expressing in the article is like, but if I send you this code to Firefox, you just say, oh, well, go use the KV storage module that's available on NPM. If it's Google Chrome, it just would have KV storage built into it. So you're reducing dependencies that the user has to go get, and that code's just there pre-compiled. It's an interesting idea of where these things can go in the future. And Mike said documentation is hard and non-existent, but it isn't non-existent anymore. So open-wc.org is your #1 independent place for information about everything that you could use to build kind of the tooling that we did. So you can go and say, I want to learn about building. And they just have stuff specific to how you build and compile web components. So I highly recommend going there. And then if you have enough coffee and a lot of Lego pieces, right? Because we've talked about 1 or 2, but in the last year, we've built, getting ahead of the Mad Hatter here. We've built 168 components. So we're not talking about little buttons anymore. And they're all scoped and they're all contained, and we run one command and they publish. We don't have to think about publishing. Mike showed the testing example, right? He tested that in a vacuum. Every tag we build is in a vacuum naturally. So then when we publish, we just kind of know it works. We mentioned accessibility very briefly, but we got dinged on an accessibility issue in the Hacks editor. There were 53 accessibility issues. Area text wasn't used. It took 4 minutes to fix. Okay.
That's impressive.
Yes. Oh my God. So because it was one button, there was one button that we used 53 times, and so when there's that error in the one button, it's not going through HTML gobbledygook anymore. It's not, oh, this is the way we think about making a button, copy and paste. It's literally the button with a reference, like Mike showed in fixing that reference to do the little bit of padding. So I went and fixed the one button. We've fixed all the accessibility issues there. So I don't have a Lego brick. I have a giant meta Lego brick of other Lego bricks. So what can we do with that? We can support WordPress, Drupal, Joomla, Backdrop, some expression engine garbage. I don't care. You just have enough copy. You can support all these things because you're extending the web platform itself. You're not extending Drupal. Get off the island. Get off the island. Get off the island. Woo! So I said WordPress, that's weird. Last year, I made fun of and defaced the Gutenberg page on WordPress.org, and no one cried. And so what I did instead is I made a WordPress plugin, which made me cry, but it's for hacks. So I can use hacks in WordPress now. If you've used Gutenberg, Gutenberg works in WordPress, and through a lot of integration works in Drupal. This took like an hour to make. It doesn't take a lot of time to write these because all of our build routines are stabilized. And so you could just not use any CMS.
What?
And you could build your own. So in the last year, that's what I've been working on. In addition to supporting everything else that we've done. Why? Because we're just enhancing the web platform. We're not enhancing a Drupal platform. We're enhancing the capabilities of the web fundamentally, and then Drupal integrates those. And so you can go to elmsln/hackcms on GitHub and hopefully start freaking out. But what it is it is the engine that is actually powering, if I click the button and it plays, Potter. Cliffhanger. Okay, see you next year.
You still need me.
I still need you for something, Mike. So this is hacks running in HackCMS. Why is it talking?
Content management.
Oh, it's talking because I'm clicking in the video.
Would you like this to be?
That is a video player tag. That is one tag. That entire video interaction. A GIF player, that's one tag. The hacks editor is one tag. And it's not, but it's made up of hundreds of other tags, all with the same level of transparency and accountability. That form is a headlessly rendered form. It's a tag. We can do headless forms now. We can just serve up JSON schema and render a form that's data validated, that's accessibility checked. I can dump things into the interface. I can do fly out swipes. Why? Because they're all one tag. Everything boils up to a single tag that is going to do the same purpose every single time, no matter what it is. So in this case, I'm just typing into a form. Oh, there's that VS Code again. That's so interesting. VS Code came up. And so then I have a drop-down select that I can toggle between different things. HyperCard, obviously, we got to go back to HyperCard, which is the real platform. I can build forms. I can, again, this is on hackstheweb.org, hackstheweb.org, hackstheweb.org. I hear it in radio announcements, you're supposed to say it 3 times. But if you go there, you're going to actually play with it and know that it's basically just adding tags to the DOM and sending in the definition and then ripping them back out again. You're not going to be able to save because it's just a static site with hundreds of pages in it that loads rocket fast once you have the definitions and is an automatic offline capable PWA, so that if you go to it on your phone, it'll say, hey, do you want to install me? And then if you shut off Wi-Fi after going to a few pages, they'll still work somehow. All 0 config. Why? Because I don't have to mess around with all the other concerns that we have. Potter, now it's in the... Now you're stuck in this mode. I don't know what I got into there, buddy. Oh, okay. Good, and we're at the beginning of the thing there. So because I don't have to worry about any of the concerns that I used to with platform-specific code, I can get at some pretty fun, awesome problems.
Oh, jeez.
And so we're just going to skip whatever that one was there, Potter. So if you're interested in more web components-based opportunities, at 9 a.m. tomorrow, there's a BOF in BOF Room 1 of the exhibit hall on level 4. Salem, are you here? No? Okay, well, Salem is running it, so I'm just going to say hey to him. I don't know, I'll try to play it, Potter. Oh, there it is. Okay. I got to scroll over? I got to scroll over and play it. Sorry, I wanted to hit play on another website, right? So if I were to, say, make a personal blog. Previously, I would have had to worry about all the infrastructure associated with Drupal, and to the point that I wouldn't even run it. But because I have web components with all these designed visual assets, single tag that I can leverage over and over and over again, right? I can start to just type and edit, and this is me editing locally, building out a website entirely via UI, right? All of these components are open source, all 168 of them. We leverage another 150 or so on top of that. And so I've had pages that have 10,000 custom elements on them and don't vomit, because we're not talking about a library orchestrating virtual DOM to make these things work. These are individual little Lego bricks. So it's almost like we're a layer below the traditional frameworks. So in this, I'm making an image, and I'm making a meme, saving it. I'm going to add a bunch of pages. My content outlining tool is also a web component, if you can imagine. So clearly, this has to talk to something on the back end, but this is a headless CMS. All of the user experience is coming in via these tags, passing data to one another, which makes it really easy for me to manage things at scale. So if I have a button and I place a heading in this new page, I can modify that to everything is just HTML. Hey, there's that VS Code again, right? Because you want source view, right? Why do we have source view that's buried in CK editor that then has to be maintained in a whole, you're gonna do source view, you're gonna edit it. Use the exact same tag every time, not fragment your user experience having the source view in CK editor versus source view in any other thing you ever make. So I have this silly tag. I'm going to take this image from my desktop. I'm going to drag and drop, upload it into a vat and upload field. So that uploader is a single tag available on webcomponents.org as well that bridges the entire experience of that. Obviously, it has to be saved somewhere, like a Drupal would be good for that. And so, yeah, we're going to burn down all the things. Who's with me? Who's with me? That's the end of the Braveheart movie, right?
Will there be coffee?
Will there be coffee? There will always be coffee.
All right.
You figure out this thing.
What did you do?
So what did I do? I'm using Google Slides here.
It's not a web component.
That's not a web component. We need a web component for that. So these are the credits. Thank you for attending. You can go check out Patternfly. Patternfly.org, really?
Yeah.
It's a website. Oh, man.
Well, better than that, we've got a whole list of some links in here. So Brian mentioned we tweeted out the links to the slide deck before the session, but it's also at the end here. We're going to show you the bit.ly in a second. But definitely some websites that you want to check out. And we would definitely appreciate you reviewing our session. And we really thank you for being here and for getting excited about web components with us. Thank you so much. We'd also like to thank the 10 or 12 cups of coffee that Brian drank prior to the session.
It was really big. It's really fantastic.
There's a microphone here for
Yeah.
any questions also. We still have time, I believe.
We do have
Yeah.
time, actually. Yeah, we've got about 15 minutes. So if you... Oh, we've got a question right
We
now.
burned through that.
Do it.
So, if somebody wanted to basically include all the pattern fly elements for their default template, is there an easy way to do that? Is there an include link or something that includes everything?
So any web component that you want to include on your web page requires reference to the JavaScript that powers that web component. And there's lots of different ways you could do that. You could roll them up into one JavaScript file if you knew you were going to use a standard set of components. There's lots of different ways to, you could probably speak more better at this than I could about JavaScript.
Yeah,
and how
so you could actually use our tooling, make a new element. So a lot of times, like what the build routine ends up being is a new element that's just a blank element, and then we just load it up with the import. So you could actually import all of their elements into our tooling, and then run a build command and get a library that has all of them.
And I want to add a specific caveat about Patternfly elements. We are at a pre-release, so we're just about to roll a 1.0 because we're still refining some of the things, but it's still worth checking out.
In the context of that answer, what I was asking for is you already have a roll-up that rolls off everything up, and you just include the roll-up and then get everything.
We do. So we're including our polyfill because we know that we have a decent number of IE11 visitors on our sites, and we only have a handful of web components, so we're just rolling them up into one.
Our build tools do that internally.
Yeah, we have build tools, but
It's internal. There's t-shirts. Help yourself.
Oh,
Small
yeah.
through 2XL.
Should have used a t-shirt gun.
yeah.
So my question, Mark, was like the example of the Awesome website with the web component. there's like 3 elements that were web components.
Yeah.
Is there like I would like to know like the trade-offs between having web components. Why don't you just create all of the elements being web components? And yeah, is there like a trade-off between having web components?
So I would say anytime that you want to replicate something, that should be a component. So if you have a logo that's in the header and also in the footer, it needs to be, it can't reside in both. You should make a component specifically for the logo itself. And then the header and the footer both import the same logo. So that's shared between the two. Was that your question?
Yeah, but mine is like, is there like a performance, do you see like a performance issue if you have too many web components? Or?
Like Brian was saying, with those experiments, he's putting in and ripping out hundreds of elements at a time.
Points where if you go to the hackstheweb.org site and you click on example themes, that is gutting the entire DOM and replacing itself, and it's like that. You barely notice it. So these things are ultra performant since you're working with a lower level specification. So I mean, yes, you're gonna, yes, you have to worry about like state management elements and things like that. But a lot of times, if you have something like Mike said, if you have something that you're gonna replicate or want a reference to specifically, then just make a custom element. You can also just use the custom element aspect of the spec. You don't have to use Shadow DOM, and we don't get into a lot of those type of conversations, but it's pretty flexible and really performant.
So I will say one caveat. If your user base is in a country that notoriously has poor internet, for example, like really slow speeds, there's a lot of JavaScript involved in this, meaning they'll have to download a lot of JavaScript files. It is very performant, especially in modern browser situations. But if, for example, you're working for like a charity organization and you know that you have a lot of users who are accessing your site from areas that do not have access to fast internet, maybe web components wouldn't be a good solution for that because CSS and HTML is going to be more performant. But there's a graceful degradation, so you could find ways to do, like if the speed is too slow, go ahead and just serve up the fallbacks. So there's ways around it, so you can do both. But yeah, HTML and CSS is going to be more performant, sure, but it's minimal in modern browsers, I think.
Yeah.
So I just want to say something about performance. So with web components, it's only delivering the CSS and JavaScript that's needed to run that component. So the more web components that you build, the smaller you can make your CSS and JavaScript bundles for all of the additional CSS that you would be shipping. So if a page isn't using a profile picture tag, you don't have to ship the profile picture, CSS, and all that other stuff that you would have in your normal CSS bundle. So eventually you can start shrinking other bundles.
Right.
And that's Kyle. He's the brains behind Pattern Play Elements. He kind of started everything up and got everyone pumped and excited and got Kevin giving him design stuff and make it a design system thing. Yeah. That's how I sound at work.
But yeah, that's a great point. As part of this process, is we kind of stage collapsed, right? So the great thing with this, make one element. Just fix one little tiny use case, get the build routines down, get the workflow down, and you can progressively collapse your way out of those giant JS and CSS bundles. So when we switched Elms over to web components, where we went from 1 to 2 to 150 in a rollout, I deleted Sass from our build routines. So we deleted 100,000 lines of CSS selectors. And now those are encapsulated in those little elements, right? It is also for low performance environments as well, like they get into server-side rendering, as mentioned before, but it's also as an odd performance thing, right? If I have a grid of images, it's got a whole ton of images, maybe 100,000 images or something, traditionally I would have sent you 100,000 divs with all the stuff that goes into it and all the CSS and all the JavaScript. Now instead I send you 100,000 single HTML tag card references and then the JavaScript for it. So the payloads can be a lot smaller in certain situations. It's kind of adds to the fun, unfortunately, because you get wishy-washy answers at times based on what your use case is. So.
But you can use Sass if
Yes.
you really love Sass and are addicted to it like me, and you need the mix-ins because I need the mix-ins.
And with style encapsulation, you can write horrible CSS and you're totally fine with it. Not feel
Not
bad
that you'd
about
ever
it.
do that.
Maybe
Right.
inline CSS that we saw in this.
You mentioned the Bitly URL.
Yeah.
Is that like
Oh, this must be a different deck.
Where
It's
was it tweeted from, too, by the way?
BT Pro,
BTO Pro and
is it on the first slide?
Kindle Ton.
Kindle Time.
You could click that.
It's
I think it's bit.ly/dcon19-web-components. Try that.
dash web dash?
Components.
So it sounds like server-side rendering is not really as
No,
useful.
it's the old deck.
Oh, it's the old deck.
The screen for it, and essentially deleting server-side rendering and just publishing use web components. Is that true?
I mean, it's a lot for it depends a lot on your audience, right? So I know you both you want to hit IE 11 and lower. I don't care in the same regard based on what my user audience is, but if you're talking like 3% of your audience has no JavaScript or has IE 11, are you going to be able to justify all the money it takes to server-side render to hit 3%, or are you going to do like a progressive enhancement routine where you ship it to them, they still do get content, it's just maybe not as spot-on perfect as what the other 98% is.
That's the benefit of Light DOM.
Yo,
It's-
yes, there are absolutely solutions.
There's a solution called VelociRender that just came out by a team that uses web components heavily. So I haven't tried it, but it uses JS DOM, which can render Shadow DOM on the server.
But I think it's a shift. Sorry, I didn't jump in. I think it's a shift in mindset between IE 11 being pixel perfect and IE 11 looking okay. And it's not like render raw content or just like, the ugliest possible. You can still style your Light DOM without the JavaScript upgrades. So you can still get a good experience.
Like SEO.
Yeah, but I mean, Google does render web components, which is really
Yeah.
cool. They'll render your web component for you, so you'll get all the SEO stuff you built.
And
Bake
Kyle
it.
is dying to tell you about shady CSS.
He's like shaking.
Google is working on server-side rendering components. It's called SSR web components. It's something that they actually demoed 2 years ago at Polymer Summit. The big problem is in server-side rendering, there's no concept of window, so that's what they have to account for. But for an SEO thing, this is something that we tested at Red Hat. We tested the SEO of a Twitter bootstrap page and a page built with web components. And one of the keys to it is writing semantic markup in your Light DOM. So if you look at like a Polymer application, they encapsulate. You basically put a tag on there and you put a bunch of custom or attributes on there and properties, and then it kind of like blows it up into the markup that only a Google crawler would see. But if you're writing as much of your semantic markup in the Light DOM, like Kendall showed in the PFP content set, when we have an H2 and we have a paragraph tag, then Google doesn't care about all that other stuff that's around it. The link or Bing crawler doesn't care about all that other stuff. It sees an H2, this is a paragraph tag that says, I know you're trying to tell me about this heading and the supporting text. So it progressively, it's like it upgrades after the initial.
I'm gonna do one more call to say please don't make me take all these shirts home. We brought all the swag for you
And when's your
guys
session tomorrow?
because you super love web components like we do. So please help yourself.
When's your session tomorrow?
2:30.
2:30 tomorrow.
Hey, good to see you, man.
I was like,
I tried that.
Thank you.
You are out.
Does that work?
I was surprised.